I moved to the States about 15 years later and became a US citizen.
Okay.
So hence, there's some words I can say with like a French accent and some words just with an English accent.
Okay, very interesting. So before we really delve into the heart of our program, can you first explain to me Burma, Myanmar, which is the right term that we should be using? Is there a preferred term? Which term do you use and why?
Well, I call it Myanmar. It's because, well, that's the way the current government is calling it. And Burma is the previous name that was established. Now, there's a discussion within the US administration to call it either Burma or Myanmar. As far as I understand it, there hasn't been any official notice from the government to either call it Myanmar or Burma. So we keep calling it Burma.
Okay.
But once again, to me, it's because the new administration, which is quite legitimate, is calling it Myanmar. So I'm just respecting their will.
Okay, that sounds like a great plan to me. So why don't you give us an explanation about the history of Myanmar first, to sort of establish some context about what we're going to be talking about for the rest of the program?
Well, for the longest period of time, just like in most of Southeast Asia, you had kingdoms fighting each other. Now, the most interesting part comes during colonization with the British. In 1948, they get independence. Now, the person who actually led the independence movement actually was killed the year prior to independence. And the second command I was going to put, his name is Unu, he was a Buddhist philosopher. He tried to have a democracy with Buddhist ideology, and it proved to be very difficult because you have 7 states, 7 divisions, 135 ethnic groups in Myanmar. And so having democracy in that type of environment with Buddhist ideology in the back did not work.
It does sound like a great idea, though.
Yes, it does. A lot of things sounds like a great idea.
Of course.
Communism sounds really good. But then, so from 1948 to 1958, democracy did not work. And so it led to some segregation, fragmentation, and there was some chaos. Mutiny happened in the army. In 1958, you get the general of the armed forces, who basically was asked to take over by the Prime Minister, Unu, and to have a caretaker government.
Okay.
So from 58 to 60, he brought stability, and he gave power back. Now in 1962, you get a coup d'etat, a bloodless coup d'etat. Now, it's because of the constitution in which the democracy that was established from 1948. It stated that if ethnic groups were not pleased with the current constitution, after 10 years of that constitution, they were allowed to part away and be somewhat independent.
That seems like a recipe for all kinds of trouble and all kinds of conflict. And is that's what's happened?
Yeah. So the army, saying that like the country was about to segregate, they took power because it's pretty much what happened in ex-Yugoslavia. The disintegration of ex-Yugoslavia, there was massive chaos and wars because it's unequal natural resources, wealth that's been distributed in the whole country. So Myanmar, same thing. You have some ethnic groups who are sitting very wealthy resources and some that aren't. And the only way this country, Myanmar, can succeed if all the natural resources are combined together through the government. Now, through history, we've noticed that like military are really good at bringing stability in chaotic environment, but they're not apt at leading a country because there's no innovation. They don't have knowledge of economics, and that's pretty much what happened. So like for more than half a century, you have failed economic policies that led on and off to conflict. The largest one is known as the 88 rebellion, in which basically you had thousands of people going down the streets, and the only way the army knows how to respond to it is by using more force.
I see.
Now at the same time, 1988, you have Aung San Suu Kyi, the daughter of the founder of modern democracy in Myanmar.
Okay, and I think that's the name that most people would recognize because she is so famous.
Yeah, she's named the lady. She even have a movie with her. And so when she got back to Myanmar, she sort of accidentally became a leader because she had her father's reputation. She's always been spreading Buddhism as well. She spent a lot of time in India. She studied in Oxford. She's well educated. And when she spread that idea of democracy, wanting more freedom, it pleased everyone. So she became a symbol of democracy. Now, with the crackdown, you get both, the junta at the time had both internal pressure and external pressure. Internally, because of Aung San Suu Kyi, and as well as the chaos that was going on in the country. Externally, because of Aung San Suu Kyi, it brought international media into the issue.
Absolutely.
So we decided by 1990 to have an election.
Okay.
And I think the reason that we had an election is because they think they could win. The military, main message has been spreading for decades was, we brought stability. We kept the country together. But the result of the 1990 election was Aung San Suu Kyi's party won. So the military was like, yeah, we see that, but we're not going to respect that because they did not want to give up power.
Okay, that's understandable.
And now, year goes on and off, and you have tremendous grave human rights violation. The most memorable ones are the 2007 one, the Saffron Revolution, in which you have the monks who are walking down the streets or who are fighting the inflation of basic goods, and that the government changed policies overnight, and basically not having the technical knowledge of economics screwed up the whole society, so which led to monk protesting. They once again reacted with violence. Now,
so what was the international media spotlight at this time? Because I imagine that this seems like something that the media would pick up on. Did that get a lot of international media coverage?
Yeah, it did. But sometimes the junta is quite used of being criticized. So to them, it's like at some point, the first criticism, you listen to it. At some point, you get criticized so much that it doesn't matter. And so that's what happened. Like they know they're not being liked, but they're still going to pursue their goal. I omitted to mention that in 2003, you had what was leaked as a 7-step roadmap toward democracy.
Okay.
Now that's what
and whose plan was this?
That was the government's plan.
Okay.
Because they were so criticized by the international community about like being a centralized government, human rights violation, that they came out with their own plan how to achieve democracy, 7 steps. Right now, they are in the 7th one, which is basically running a whole democratic system. And so going back to 2007 monk revolution, they responded that we are going toward democracy. And that's pretty much what we're seeing today. The opening of 2010, that's the consequences, the results of that roadmap toward democracy.
I see. So that's a really great sort of background to how Myanmar got to be where it is today. So thank you for illuminating that. So what are the current challenges to establishing democracy in Myanmar? And I realize, of course it is a huge question, but can you just talk us through sort of what are the biggest basic challenges to becoming a fully fledged democracy in Myanmar now?
Well, to me, you have 3 biggest issues. The first one is after more than half a century of being closed, it established a black market economy. The black market economy has spread all over the country, and going to all the neighboring countries as well. Now,
so when we say black market, what kind of goods are we talking about?
We're talking about opium, talking drugs, minerals, #1 in the world, wood, teak. Pretty much, Myanmar is rich in almost every natural resources in the world. So that's why, and it's strategically located as well between India and China, and it's an opening for Southeast Asia.
Sure.
So this is the geopolitical situation which attracts all the other countries, but it's all the natural wealth. There's oil and gas as well in that country. So which basically since decolonization, they suffer from the resource curse.
Yes.
Which is in theory, you get huge companies such as oil and gas. trying to penetrate the country, and they work with the government directly. But since the source of revenues comes from the outside, the government doesn't have any interest in trying to provide for their own people because they're not providing them with income. So therefore, pretty much the money that goes into the government goes into exploiting those resources, which at the same time they need to protect. Since it's instability in the country because of those resources, exploitation, exploitation, the military spends more on its own to protect those investments, which means more human rights violation because you need to protect those pipelines or.
So how is the average person reacting to that? Because that seems grossly unfair. So to the government not responding to domestic needs.
Obviously that's why Myanmar was so well known for its human rights violation. Once again, you need to understand this, like more than 17 armed groups. Some of them are highly powerful. You have the Wa, the Shan, and the Kachin, which are sitting on oil and gas, on some oil and gas, but it's mostly opium. They're incredibly wealthy, and for the longest time, their army was more developed than the juntas. So there's always a conflict, and people are just fighting each other, this ethnic and religious division among them. There's no real national identity.
I see.
Obviously, it's unfair, but life is unfair.
Okay, so in addition to those challenges, what about border problems, border disputes? Does Myanmar have border disputes with its neighbors?
Well, most of the dispute, as far as I know, it's about how porous they are. There's a lot of drugs goes into China, Thailand, Laos, which obviously all those neighboring countries are not very happy about. Now the issue is like it's such a big country. It's the largest land country in Southeast Asia. They don't have the capabilities of monitoring those borders, one. Secondly, it's a lot of those borders area are being owned by ethnic groups who are, yes, right now there's a ceasefire between the ethnic groups and the junta, but doesn't mean that they don't cooperate well with each other. That's what we're trying to establish right now. That's why the next 2 years is going to be essential for if Myanmar is going to be able to establish its own style of democracy. And yeah, borders are just porous, basically.
So it seems like the central government will have a huge challenge on its hands if we have all of these different porous borders, if we have all of these different ethnic groups, if we have all of these different factions. Consolidating power seems like something that might be problematic in the near term.
Well, yeah, it is, and that's why the second issue is the first one is moving from an illegitimate economy to a legitimate economy. The second issue is about bringing national reconciliation, bringing all those ethnic groups working together. Now, I stated before, 135 ethnic groups, 7 states, 7 divisions, and in the whole history of Myanmar, only 3 times has it been unified as one country, which isn't much.
No, and can you explain to me a little bit more about which times those were in its history?
It was mostly, the last one was under the kingdom in, I think, 1750 to 1766.
So it's really way back in history.
And this has a huge impact in the way the society is today. I mean, they just don't have an idea of one Myanmar, of national identity. It's not present. Now, because of the decades of black market economy, it has created a whole network of cronies, both at the government level, at the private sector level. And that goes in all the neighboring countries as well. So it's a very tricky situation, and you need to take into account that there's also within the government, there's internal disagreements. Now, one example is that Aung San, who's the father of Aung San Suu Kyi, was killed by the previous prime minister.
Okay.
And so there's like personal rivalries. today we see President Tan Sien and the lower house Speaker Schuman having open disagreements. That's just within the government. Now there's also the army, in which this what they call hardliners. Those people are like the ones who are benefiting greatly under the previous administration. They're part of cronies. They made a lot of money, and they don't want to see that money go away, which is like it's understandable. But what the government had to do, and what I also suggest in this project, is you can't get rid of everyone, of all the ones who have done mistakes, because it's so large. We're talking like majority of the country are part of this black market economy. For example, by the 1987, the black market economy was thought to be 5 times greater than the legitimate economy.
That's a huge difference.
Exactly. So what the government have to, in order to have some kind of real influence in those regions, in this market, they had to bring those people, those cronies, into the government. They had to somewhat legitimize them. But telling them that in this new era, they have to work with the government to bring Myanmar to a better Myanmar. And that's what they are trying to do. The third issue in Myanmar is in terms of capacity building.
Okay.
Now, in terms of, you have capacity building can be divided in 3 areas. You have one which is at the personal level, individual level, which is basically you provide those people with education, like middle management.
Okay.
The people on top are efficient, but they lack people who can apply the policies at the day-to-day basis. And at the institutional level, you need a rule of law. You need market regulation. You need housing. You need healthcare. You need public transportation. All of this, and you need to have parts of governments who can apply those things. This is not. It's being created right now. At the third level, societal level, so the one where like bringing an identity, make them be part of this new Myanmar that's going to establish on-style democracy. And capacity building is essential for its future, because you can't have Myanmar if you can have all the political will you want, but you can't achieve your goal if you don't have the means for it. And the capacity building aspect of it is basically being able to bring from what it was before to its own style democracy.
So this seems like there are a number of challenges, really difficult things to do. We talk about establishing rule of law. We're going to be making changes to the economy from the black market to more legitimate markets. This seems incredibly challenging. Who is pushing for all of this? Is this really sort of a ground up, we want change in our country sort of movement, or who's orchestrating this? Who's leading the charge?
Well, once again, from my perspective, it's the government. It's completely top down. It's because that's what they wanted. If you, like, I briefly discussed its history, but if you looked at why did they have the 1990 elections? Because they thought they could win. They stayed in power because they want to legitimize their authority. They entered ASEAN in 1997. Now, the circumstances is basically you had India on one side trying to enter the Myanmar market. You had China, who's been working with Myanmar since the 50s. And you had Southeast Asia. And there's just so much potential. I mean, once again, it's strategically located and it's great economic potential. 60 million people live there. And so for Myanmar, they enter ASEAN, providing, by the fact that they enter ASEAN, it gave them legitimacy. That's what the junta was looking for, being recognized as the sole authority of Myanmar. Because you need to understand in the background that like they always have Aung San Suu Kyi, who's being represented as this symbolic messiah of democracy. But which also leads to Aung San Suu Kyi was put in house arrest, never really mistreated. Well, I mean, like house arrest is pretty bad already. She spent 15 out of the last 20 years in there. But they knew that they couldn't attack her, they couldn't do anything bad to her physically because it would be counterproductive for what they wanted. Now, President Tan Sen has been elected by the government it was an election, but it was, I mean, it's pretty much from the government, they wanted to establish democracy.
Okay.
And in 2010, which is like after they've learned from their mistakes, after they changed the constitution in which Aung San Suu Kyi cannot run for presidency, they set themselves up to basically bring its own style of democracy.
So if the government doesn't succeed with its aims, what are the alternatives? What might happen if they aren't able to establish the state that they're looking for?
Well, I mean, going back to if the thought of going back to a centralized authoritarian system is unlikely because of all the media, all the international attention that people is putting in. I mean, President Obama went to visit in November. It's just there's too much pressure from them internally and externally, because now internally people have hope of seeing public education, seeing healthcare everywhere, of seeing rural development, of starting to fight against opium and all that, which they are initiating. There's a lot of good policies have been put in place. We're talking about new investment laws in which foreigners are now allowed to own companies in Myanmar. They don't need a local partner. Censorship laws have been completely taken out. Now then you write an article, you don't have to send it to the government to get it approved, to send it, to get it published. One of the biggest symbol was in the by-election, the opposition, the National League for Democracy, Aung San Suu Kyi's party, won 43 seats into the parliament. I mean, they are very unlikely to go back. And if it were to fail, because if you think about it, if you're an ethnic group and you have all this international attention, you know it's going to limit the approach or the use of force of the government because of so much international attention.
Sure.
So if you are ethnic groups, if you want it, you could push it. You could push your message, be like, no, I don't agree with you, because you know we're gonna have to. The military, the government, can't be as violent as it used to be when it wasn't open, because people are paying attention to it. And anyway, like, there's so much investment going into Myanmar from all over the world.
So speaking of investments, do you think, for example, are U.S. companies starting to invest in Myanmar, or is that still too risky?
Yeah, I mean, Hilton
adventure?
just opened a hotel, and they're planning to open a new one. Because real estate in Myanmar is double the price of the one in Hawaii.
Okay.
We're talking about $5,000 for like 2-bedroom.
So is that renting prices or are those?
Renting prices.
Okay.
So money's coming from everywhere. But once again, because it lacks of middle management, it lacks of capacity building, that it's making really hard to stabilize this investment. What investors are worried is basically if that money goes into it, you don't know where it's going, you don't know how it's going to be used, and you don't know how stable the society is going to be.
Sure.
So
that does seem like quite a bit of a risk, though, especially with the challenges that you had just previously laid out. It does seem, while there's great opportunity and a great potential reward, it does seem like it might be a little bit risky for foreign businesses to enter into the market just yet. But it looks like they're still doing it anyway.
Well, it's because the government has done nothing but to try to secure those investments. I mean, it's from the top down. There's strong political will to achieve its democracy, and the rules that they're putting in place are completely sound and rational. The issue is about the applications of those rules into society. That's the hard part, and so, but it's the trust that investors have into the government. That's why people keep pouring money.
So as we start talking about investment, the next natural question would be tourism. Does Myanmar have a great tourist sector?
Well, it's developing it right now. It used to be where you only were able to go to like small zones, but now the whole country is open. The issue of tourism is you need housing, which they're completely in lack of, and they are in development right now.
Okay.
I mean, it's a beautiful country, completely untouched. infrastructures. Roads are still made of dirt. So they're trying to bring tourism as a source of revenues, because they're so vast in natural resources. They can do anything basically. And actually, what in this project I'm trying to do is to promote green tourism, which, since you're going to build a whole city, a whole country, might as well do it right. Do it with new technologies.
Of course, that's a great argument.
And so, and I suggest that they get approached by the best. The best cities, green cities in the world are from China, Sweden, Costa Rica. And so, why not get some technical knowledge from those countries, from those cities, and build it up? But we should start now, which will come out in the next 5 to 10 years.
And is that something that we're already seeing happening, or is that still in the works?
Well, this, as discussed, there's so many different aspects of society that needs to be built, and because of the lack of middle management, like top ministers have 10 to 15 meetings a day. They're being completely stretched, and there's a real risk of burning out. Now, once again, the policies are sound. It's just how it's being applied on the field. That's the biggest problem. You don't have a well-educated workforce. You don't have people who speak fluently English everywhere. You don't, and so it's going to take time. But once again, there is political will to achieve this goal of democracy.
So when we talk about your thesis, which is establishing a Myanmar style of democracy, how would the characteristics differ from, say, the United States or other democracies? What kind of specific characteristics would make it unique to Myanmar in your vision for the country?
Well, first of all, democracy is such a vague term, because so-called democracy in the United States is very different from democracy in Britain or in France or in Germany. They're mostly type of republics.
Okay.
So what Myanmar should learn from other countries, but shouldn't try to imitate democratic system, because you need to take into account that they have their own history and their own environment, that they should just take what works for them. And right now, honestly, the government is trying its best. It's trying to see what can be done to achieve their own style of democracy. And there isn't a great grand plan for what it will look like. And that's why this is called establishing, because it's basically, this project is trying to view what the ending will be. What in 20 years Myanmar will look like. A normal state with independent judiciary, legal, and executive branches. One where, from my perspective, it has to find in a spectrum, in its style of democracy, between what Singapore is and what the United States is. In this spectrum, Myanmar needs to find where it belongs. And so, because of its great wealth, Myanmar could easily use its natural resources as a base for its economy, but also production. 70% of the people still live in rural areas. And then you have mining, fisheries, agriculture, all that. It's great potential. And as discussed, tourism. There's just great potential for this country. But there's also great potential. I said there's many risks of many things going wrong.
Sure.
And so that's why the next 2 years will be crucial to see if Myanmar can achieve it, because at the end of this year, Myanmar has decided to host the Southeast Asian Games.
Okay.
Which will be taking place in December.
So to me, when I hear hosting of the games, that seems like there must be enormous infrastructure requirements, security requirements.
Yeah.
So it is a challenge, but then it's also really an opportunity to sort of build these systems, like you said, from the ground up, and to do it right.
Yeah, and I think just last year they had the banking system. First time ever. Wi-Fi internet is only available in very 5-star hotels. And it's completely limited. Running water is not even present in the whole country yet. Electricity as well. So, but they are trying to concentrate in small areas, mostly in Naypyidaw and Rangoon. And once again, as far as I know, it's they're building it. I don't know how well it looks, how good it looks, how efficient, but hopefully they'll be able to host the games and have all this infrastructure ready.
And that also seems like a really great opportunity for the spotlight to really be on Myanmar and show the rest of its neighbors and show the rest of the world, this is all the progress we're making, here's all the things that are happening. So it seems like a good PR opportunity.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, like Myanmar, when it was closed, manipulated every country in the world. I mean, that's fairly impressive that a government whose, I mean, the leader was used astrologers to make decisions.
I see.
He overnight moved the capital from Rangoon to Naypyidaw because his astrologer told him so. Well, there's also the fact that, and it's in the middle of the forest. There's only one road connecting the new capital to the rest of the country.
I see.
But they've done really well at manipulating the United States, China, the United Nations, and Europe. And now that we're opening up, everyone's coming to them.
What's the role of the international community in Myanmar's development? You know, we talked a little bit about investment, but what about, you know, U.S. foreign policy? What role do we have in their transition?
Well, the international community, what's done is mostly they had sanctions against Myanmar, and which closed the country up, obviously.
Okay.
But at the same time, what it did, it sort of helped Myanmar more, because Myanmar became more dependent on its neighbors. And so once we entered ASEAN, we worked with China, we worked with India, actually legitimized and made the junta at the time stronger, because China was giving them some arms, and Southeast Asia, ASEAN provided an outlet for its goods. So the international sanctions sort of backfired because we could still buy arms. I mean, like some of the opium-owned territory by ethnic groups have tanks. I mean, it's really hard to buy a tank, and it's just this sanctions only work when everyone obeys by it.
Sure.
And so when you have, so basically it backfired.
I see. What's Myanmar's relationship like with China?
Well, Myanmar, once again, did really well at manipulating China, but so did China. Because there's a border between China and Myanmar. And what China has done is established two types of relationship. One with the junta, and secondly with the ethnic groups. Because...
So it's like they're playing both sides.
Yeah. It's basically, if the junta didn't give what China wanted, China could leverage them with the other ethnic group and vice versa. I mean, tactically, it's brilliant. Now, at the same time, China has shown its limit to its support of Myanmar. What China has done is basically, it supported Myanmar's junta during the bad times. I mean, at the United Nations level especially. And because of all the sanctions, China either blocked them or diluted them. Now, one event that shows China's commitment was in 2007 when the United Nations tried to have a sanction against Myanmar. And because of the grave human rights violation, China supported the United Nations movement, but it diluted its document.
I see.
But that was the first time in which China showed that, like, economically, it was a bad move, but politically, it was right for China, because at the time, you need to understand, 2007, you had the Olympics 2008, so China was trying to change its image. So China supports the government and is still supporting the government, has huge investment in the country in terms of electricity, dams, and it's also, they want to use Myanmar as an alternative outlet to the Strait of Malacca.
I see.
Because they build a pipeline in which they have oil and gas and whatever goods that travels by sea going to Myanmar to the port and be pushed to Myanmar to China directly.
So it's a very strategic partner for China to have.
Yes. Yes.
All right. What about India? What's Myanmar's relationship like with India?
Well, India was sort of a two-phase relationship, because prior to 1990, India supported the democratic movement. Aung San Suu Kyi, as stated earlier, lived in India for a while. And so we supported the NLD, National League for Democracy, to fight against the junta. In 1990, the election fails, and the junta is in power. In 1992-93, India comes out with its Look East policy.
Yes.
Which is basically, they had no real alternative, but they had to work with the junta. So India, I mean, they were being pragmatic. They need to work with Myanmar because India is not very, India's neighbors are not very friendly with India. So they need a good partner in the region, and Myanmar became one of them. And so now they are trying to work economically. I mean, they're trying to invest. But as far as India is trying to compete against China, China is still winning.
So in our discussions about Myanmar fully transitioning into a democracy, we keep coming back to economics.
Yes.
Do you think that Myanmar has the potential to become sort of the next Singapore or Malaysia or countries like that? How far away in time would that sort of success story be for Myanmar?
Well, I said in the next 2 years, we'll see if Myanmar can do it or not. Because we're going to see at the end of this year, if they're able to host the SEA Games, and the next year, in 2014, they'll be the host of ASEAN. And so if they can do the next 2 years, they'll be establishing their own sort of democracy, be successful economically and politically. That's why we're waiting for the next 2 years.
So this is a really critical time, but it also seems like an interesting time, an exciting time, with all different things happening.
Yeah, I mean that's why that's why we get interested, because you never know what's going to happen, and it's to see how much it has achieved in such a short period of time is incredible. And I mean, it looks like it's going well, but once again, it's all about the application of those current policies and how they're going to be done on the field on a day-to-day basis. And I mean, having to work with the ethnic groups and the government will be one of the key issues to work out.
So we've talked a lot about the government as well as the ethnic groups, but what about civil society? Is there an active civil society in Myanmar?
Oh, it's active. It's very active.
Share a little bit.
Okay, well, I'll give you personal examples. Like when I was working at the border between Myanmar and Thailand, there was about 300 Myanmarese in that small town.
Okay.
But there was more than 150 NGOs.
Wow.
Built from themselves. So I mean, this is a joke that if you get three Myanmarese, you get 3 NGOs, one for each person and one for the 2 of them. Civil society is huge in Myanmar, and that's actually one of the problems. It's because you get so many different point of views, so many people disagree. And I mean, I think at the last election, there was the by-election. There was more than 200 political groups.
Wow.
But obviously the largest one is the National League for Democracy. It's just 7 divisions, 7 states, 135 ethnic groups. Yeah, it's really hard.
So these NGOs, are they domestic in nature, or are these international organizations descending onto Myanmar? Because it does seem to be a sort of very fashionable place to set up an NGO. Is that what it's like?
Sort of, yes. You have both the domestic NGOs, but you also have the ones that's been sponsored by Christian groups from big organizations. George Soros is there. Yeah, they come from everywhere.
And do you think that NGOs are helping, or are they hurting? A mix of both.
Okay. Well, you have some NGOs that have their own ideas about how to spend the money, and which some of those ideas don't necessarily overlap with what the country needs. It's the donor wants, okay, I want you to build school in that area, or I want you to educate them, or some of them are just promoting their own religion as well, which that's not the priority. It's not a priority of what the country needs. So it can be counterproductive. There's a lot of overlapping what international organizations and NGOs are doing. So it's helping at the immediate term, because yes, it's providing food and money and housing to the people, but in the long term, it's might be making it worse somewhat, because it's deunifying the country.
And what the country needs now more than ever is to
Yeah.
be united. So you've mentioned that the next 2 years, the short term, the medium term, it's going to be a really critical time for the country. So what specific steps can the country start taking to sort of move more firmly into the direction of a fully functioning democracy?
Well, I think first of all, we need to see what democracy will look like in Myanmar. What is the end goal? When I look at a problem, I need to see, okay, what do I need to achieve at the end? What would democracy in Myanmar look like? And then work backward from it.
Okay.
So what this project is doing is basically, it sets in 15 years, Myanmar will be a normal state with independent judiciary, legal, and executive branch. Now, how do you achieve it? Going backwards, the next 5 to 10 years are crucial, in which basically the policies that have been put in place right now needs to succeed, and you need to certify to build up the momentum and to legitimize that the government is really going toward democracy. Now, and you need to have a legitimate economy. Once again, to move from an illegitimate economy to a legitimate economy. That's the bigger issue that needs to happen between the immediate term and the long term. If they can achieve that, which is incredibly difficult, then they will achieve their goal without a doubt. So therefore, what's going on right now, we need to see that the policy put in place are being applied in the field correctly, that they are fighting against opium, that they're providing an alternative to farmers than growing opium. Because, I mean, for a farmer, opium, all you need to do is plant the seed and let it go. That's it, you have nothing to do. For corn or any other agricultural goods, you need to take care of it. And financially, drug money is a lot of money. So we
need to find new incentives.
Exactly. So what the government has been doing, I mean, they destroyed more than a third of all the opium fields, but they've only provided rice in exchange, which doesn't respond to the immediate issue, but doesn't in the long term. Those farmers need to have school, need to have public health, need to have grains provided to them so that we can grow something else than opium. And because agriculture is by seasons, it needs to be done before the season starts for growing opium or growing those alternative seeds. And start the initiative of starting a green economy, having green companies investing, telling them how to build architecture, those new cities, needs to happen now, and needs to be followed in a midterm. For basically, when we hope that in the short term, Myanmar will have international funding, but with the development of its own exploration of its own resources, we'll be able to fund their own initiative to develop toward its own self-democracy.
So how important is that component of international aid? Is that something that you think is really key to the success of Myanmar, that the international community needs to step up and help fund this development?
Well, the international community is already giving a lot of money. And yes, it is crucial. But what they need, I'll say, as important as the money, is the training and the expertise. They need people to basically tell them how to run a country. They need to teach them how to work in a parliamentary system in which you have to cooperate and consolidate with the opposing party. They need to learn how to build roads. They need to learn how to provide electricity for everyone. And they need the technical training.
So are there any sort of formalized knowledge sharing or technical training programs that exist?
Like USAID is giving a lot of money. But once again, because of this lack of mineral management, because of those ministers who are being overstretched, it's on the ground. A lot of policies or a lot of decisions are made on the spot ad hoc, which are being implemented imperfectly.
I see.
And so because there's a lack of communication, cooperation within the new government, it's hard to see efficient results on the ground.
One of the questions that I have now is, we hear about all these challenges, but all the opportunities. What about leadership? What role does having a strong leader play in this? And does Myanmar have a strong leadership in its current head of state?
Well, President Thein Sein is definitely the one who's been leading all the reforms. If he really wants it, there's no doubt about it. And there is a strong leadership, but sometimes the military is not necessarily agreeing with what he's doing. So it's hard to move forward because Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Defense can say what they want, but the military guy on the ground, if they don't agree, they just won't respect it. I was talking to a government official, and he was telling me, like, when they send NGOs or they send international aid or whatever, they have to, like, they can have all the permits from the government, but if the person on the ground, a military person, if he doesn't get an order from the top-ranking generals, he won't let them go. And then it's just on a day-to-day basis. Like, some of those military people, some of them are educated, some of them aren't. Some of them are friendly toward moving toward democracy, some of them aren't. So it depends on the person, but there's a huge, not conflict, but a lot of issues between the military and the current government.
So if those issues between the military and the current government can get resolved, that would be a big boost forward for the country and hopefully would sort of spur more progress.
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. But once again, this is like a very utopian idea.
Sure.
Yeah, we should all get along. But in real life, it's a lot harder. There's a lot of concession that needs to be made. There's a lot
of politics.
Yeah, exactly.
So what other specific steps can the government or can citizens of Myanmar take to actualize this goal?
Well, I think they need to start, countries, NGOs, international organizations, actually start to set up what is their goal. I don't think anyone in the country, whether it's the opposition or the government, have a clear idea what's the goal they want to achieve. And it's because of this lack of of end product that it's making a lot of mistakes, or a lot of things are being done are overlapping with one another. A lot of money is being wasted.
How difficult do you think it would be to sort of articulate an end goal that not even most people, but that many people might agree with? And do you think that the inability to reach an end product that everybody wants, do you think that's harming the process? I imagine that with all the different groups and all the different states and all of these historic divisions, that it might be difficult to sort of articulate a goal that everybody's on board with.
Yeah. I mean, here's the thing, no one's going to agree, but it's to have one that the majority of people agree. You have some ethnic groups who want to stay the way they are because they have a lot of money out of it. And so how are you going to convince someone who's already very wealthy, and you're trying to, like, listen, you need to, like, give me some of that money that you're making so I can build roads. Like, it's in theory, yes, people should get along and work together for an end goal in which we all agree, but it's never going to happen. So what this project is being very pragmatic in the sense that, like, it's believing in a sort of centralized system. What I mean centralized system, I don't mean like being full-on authoritarian like it used to be. I mean a system in which you have a tax system. One where every person pays taxes back to the central government. That government is building roads in exchange, providing education, healthcare, for the people. But before any of this can happen, both the government, the military, and those ethnic groups needs to come into an accord about how to explore and exploit those resources. From speaking to other people working in this field, like the best way would be to give a certain percentage, guarantee a percentage for those ethnic groups in exchange for the exploration and exploitation of those resources. And with that money, to make sure that right now, people on the ground see development, seeing schools being built, seeing hospitals, seeing roads, seeing electricity, all those things. They need to see on-the-spot development for both internal support and international support.
So as we talk about shifting the current order and potentially making some big changes to things that groups have been accustomed to in the past, what about the prospects for violence? Do you think that violence is in the past for Myanmar, or do you think that, as we start seeing more reforms, that violence may happen again?
Well, violence is always going to exist, no matter which society you are from. I mean, it's part of everyday life, unfortunately. But that's what we are. People at times do bad things. Now, the likelihood of total war within Myanmar, or civil war, is unlikely. But spats of conflict will always occur. Now, it's about having a certain level of conflict in which your society can still run. And so that's where the balance needs to be made in Myanmar. Because like right now, there's two major conflicts in the Arakan state and the Kachin state, which in Kachin state they're using arms as well. Right, and those two are starting to go out of proportion. And if it goes out of proportion, then it's going to affect the investment of people, the trust that they have in the stability of the current government. And so it is in the interest of the government, as well as the ethnic groups, because they want to see investment as well, that they have to find somewhat common ground. And this is yet to be found yet.
All right. So do you have any final thoughts about everything that we've discussed today to share with our viewers?
Well, Myanmar is doing very well. It is, I mean, for decades, it tried to open up, try to legitimize its government. And right now it's succeeding. And they are on the right path. Now, it's all about middle management and trying to see the application of those theory in practice. But I believe that it's working. And so, yes, invest in Myanmar.
Sounds great. Thank you so much. My guest today on Asian Review has been Billy Tea, who is a WSD Honza Fellow at Pacific Forum. And Billy, that was really fascinating. I think you really shed a lot of light on Myanmar for a lot of people. So,
well, thank you for having me.
Thank you. So I'm Ellise Akazawa. Have a good one. Thanks for watching.